The short answer is an overwhelming yes. The playstyle, the switching of forms, the flexibility, the erosion application, and the feet!
I've looked at this for 5 hours now.
Yes. Here's the longer version. She blew me more out of the water than the tides she cuts in half. She offers a lot of great things, but she also introduces a flaw that I think is a big one, and I'm not terribly fond of it. It's tied to her, but it also goes beyond her, and it will be a growing pain we get past with time or an ongoing issue. However, it didn't start with her. So let's talk about it. I'll hit you with the things that I really enjoy about Cartethyia, and then I'll go into the big flaw I hope isn't going to be getting bigger as we go on. First, the positives. Her playstyle and animations are absolutely peak wonderful. The seeds of my children would enjoy this decades later. The particular thing I need to highlight is the flexibility in her transformations. I want to highlight it since I want this to be a thing going forward more often. I have always hated when characters could go into an empowered state, then as soon as you switch off, you're back to normal, kind of like Encore. That's the biggest thing I hate about Encore as a unit.
Some kind of idiot.
Cartethyia allows free use of either form, and Fleur-de-Lis can be used indefinitely when meeting the right circumstances. I have lost gallons. I seriously hope that going forward, this is something that is more common for characters who either have entirely different forms or enhanced ones. It's a huge W. The other positives are in regards to her feat. I mean, big damage, and more importantly, her self-sufficiency for debuff application. The biggest point I wanted to be right about was her self-sufficient potential on erosion application. After all, needing to have another unit to pair with them sucks and limits who you effectively want. Chikona is thankfully not necessary for full efficacy and full function, which in terms of functionality I never really doubted since it's not much of an issue in Withering Waves. She's a premium option, but she's definitely not needed. One of the biggest boons too is that Erover sort of fixes erosion stacks too, because of his outro skill raising stacks of erosion past the normal cap. The cap for erosion is 3, and it's super easy to get 3 stacks since it's in a majority of Cartethia's kit. But even if you're struggling maintaining the stacks until Fleur-de-Lis's liberation to get big damage, you can swap back to Cartethyia for a second to reapply erosion, then liberate within time. It's what I've been doing and it works stupidly well, and also helps in situations where there's smaller enemies because of her last 2 hits of her basic attack grouping enemies. This will hopefully help with the annoying teddy bear that you spend 40 seconds trying to kill quickly in something like Whimpering Wastes. I was really worried that Cartethyia would have to lean too much on an erosion applicator to be on par with some of the units we have now. Thankfully, that isn't the case, and I'm hoping Kuro will take the Cartethyia outline of self-sufficient debuff application and use that in the future when we inevitably start getting more debuff integration, which, by the way, still doesn't feel too great at this point of 2.4. But now we get to the negative aspect, which is big in its own way and again proceeds past Cartethyia. Cartethia's investment level is sort of like none of the other characters, and I mean that in a bad way. This is because she is the first real HP scaler people care about utilizing, no offense to Baija. People care because she's a DPS, so her role is in being on field, dishing out damage the best she can. HP scaling for supports aren't as significant of a point because their roles are significantly smaller in this game and, in a nice chunk of cases, may not even be necessary. Since Carne Asada is a HP scaling DPS unit, Along with her best in slot echoes being new, you'll need to grind quite a bit since I know most of you threw away all of your HP scaling things. But it's not just the HP scaling, it's specifically her weapon I have a problem with. Now, I won't say you need to get her weapon, but because of what she is, there are literally no other weapons that will be effective with her. I mean that literally. Basically 100% of the weapons being will be more or less on par with each other if it's not HP or basic attack stats. At least from what I've seen from my peers who have made the calcs, you're missing a nice chunk of damage that literally can't be substituted closely weapon-wise. The next best weapon is Camellia's weapon, which is more or less falling in line with every other weapon anyways. This is important to point out because weapons are your more permanent things you want to level and focus on first. Cartethyia in a way flips that and makes it so that you need to more heavily rely on RNG stats to semi-make up for the huge loss in her essentially having little to no weapon. Now, I may hear some of you say that Brant is a close parallel, and you're right, he is, as he is similar in aiming for a specific stat, energy recharge. In fact, I'd consider him to be the origin of this problem I'm mentioning. However, the difference comes in that he still scales well with attack, and has many more options that can work with him both in weapon and with echoes. At minimum, you'd be changing out his 3 costs, but you could slap on a universal set like Lingering Tunes or Moonlit Glow, or even a Molten set from Encore and still dish out reasonable damage until you eventually got something more suited to him. Contrasted to Cartethyia, since again, I know most of you don't keep HP stat echoes, if you want variability in echo builds, you'll need to literally invest in a whole new set of echo stats entirely for her. That is across the board. Sierra Gale or Gust of Welkin couldn't be tossed onto Cartethyia from someone like Gion or Air because their stats would literally just not work well with her. The weapon presents a current problem: weapon diversity with different scaling characters. Cartethyia is the first real character where I think people can maybe really feel a damage difference between having her weapon and not. It's something that was gonna happen sooner or later, but I think Kuro could and should do a better job at providing more weapons to help offset the damage differences. At the very least, having more variability in the weapon pool would help alleviate future characters who will inevitably fall into this line of differing stat allocation. Again, it's not to say that she simply doesn't work without her weapon, she can still do well, but something about this just doesn't feel too great. It's sort of an uh-oh kind of moment I think should be pointed out. Overall, Quesadilla is keeping me thoroughly happy in many ways, both in and outside of the game. The Dark Tide pales in comparison to the corrupting fluid which comes from my Leviathan.
What the fuck? What does that even mean?
Sexy woman aside, flexibility and playstyle is what really shines with her because of her transformation freedom and switch-ups and how you want to attack with her. But with the fun you can have with her, I feel like she's very costly in investment, and has drawbacks from the fact that she cannot utilize any other sword to even part capacity if it's not her signature weapon. I get your guaranteed weapons, but is that really going to be your excuse or argument if later down the line every future character is more or less in need of their weapon to output enough damage? Still, she met my expectations, and I think if you want her, it's also best to maybe consider her weapon too. If not now, then later when she reruns. How has Carte Blanche been treating you?